And we're live. Hey guys, welcome back to Whiskey Charlie, the War Game Chat, our monthly show on YouTube. I'm your host, Mo from Mo's Game Table, and joining me today is my esteemed co-host, everybody's favorite Gimp with the Limp, the Gimpy Gamer, Nate Rogers. Pardon the throat today. How's it going, Nate?
Another glorious day in the Corps, man.
And we have a very esteemed panel of guests today, which I am not going to go and introduce every one of them on their own. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. We'll start off with Fabrizio. Go ahead. You take it away, Fabrizio.
Hi, guys. Introducing myself, not easy, never easy. I am the publisher of the games. I'm the developer of the games, of the C3 series and of the 1985 series, and of the newest strategical series covering the ancient warfare. And I am basically the guy everybody is complaining to when a rule is not the rule that they like, or something is not working, or even if something is working. So it doesn't really matter. The most important thing is complaining, and I'm here for that. That's it.
Tony?
Hi. As you've seen me before, my name's Tony Morfitt. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm the general factotum, I suppose. I wander around acting as the devil's advocate within the firm, suggesting that this might work, that might not work, this might be correct, that might not be correct. Do I have any real reason for being able to do that? No, probably other than a fair degree of arrogance, hubris, and a few years in the British Army before I started doing this. That's me. Thanks.
Lionel?
Okay, I'm Lionel Martinez. I'm player for a wargamer for almost 40 years, and I start working with Fabrizio and Tony on Sacred Oil some years ago. And I'm not very I'm not an expert on Third World War, so I'm mostly on the playtest side of the development. Playtesting and proofreading. If you find a counter that is missing something, it's you can blame me instead of blaming Fabrizio.
I
Now
can add
everybody
that
knows.
Lionel, it's an incredible playtester. If you really want to find a problem, Lionel is your man, and that's a big plus for a playtester.
Absolutely. You definitely want people to have that attention to detail, can pick things up like that. Nicholas?
Yes, and so I'm also the guy you don't really know why he's here. Well, some of you may know me from Lock and Load Tactical because I've also been playing war games since I was 9 years old, a long time ago. But I actually started working on them with Honneur et Patrie, which was the 1985 French in the Lock and Load Tactical series back when it was Mark Walker. So that was 2011, 2012. And so for this one, I was really happy to give a hand trying to get the French Orbat right. Something that Fabrizio hasn't said is that I actually wasted 2 days trying to go to the French military archives and get the original document, to be told on the second day that I couldn't access them because the relevant archives hadn't even been pre-sorted for things like top secret. So we actually had to find a workaround using our Bundeswehr contact, who had some amazing documents that correlated some of the stuff that you could find online. And so, yeah, I think we have something that's that worked, but it took us an inordinate amount of time to get it right.
Yeah, I would like to add that in the expedition that Nicholas made to the archives was a bold attempt to gather all the information where the information actually are. But as he said, the problem is the French army takes secrecy very, very seriously.
Yeah,
And so you could wonder why some documents regarding 1985 tactical organization and equipment or order of battles are still secret, but that's it. They're still secret.
It's even worse than that. They don't know if it's secret or not because they haven't started sorting them.
Because
Wow.
knowing that is a secret or not is already a breach of secrecy. And so it's better you don't know. You know
I approve, comrade.
Nothing. Exactly. Yeah. Duh. And
That's the thing. It's funny that, they haven't even gone through and sorted something that's like 40 years old. It's like, guys, come on, when are you going to catch up? Are you just finishing up the World War II stuff? I mean, it's like, and how dare they? Do they not know that war gamers need this information?
Yeah. And as Nicholas said, luckily, Bundeswehr has a less strict secrecy parameters, and so we were able to actually gather most of the French order of battles for the 1985 from them. And I also have some interesting documents to show after during the stream.
Well, we got the first question of the day here, which is kind of the standard question. Any reprints planned?
Okay, so the reprint is always a hard question because having fun, as I wrote on the official TRL games pages, having fun is one of the most important things in this work, in this job, and reprints are not always fun. So we are doing it, but not probably as fast as most people would like to. We have been programmed for sure to have a fourth echelon of 1985 Under an Iron Sky, and a second echelon, where for echelon I mean reprints, a second echelon of the Dogs of War, that was the second module in the C3 series. For Under an Iron Sky, for the fourth echelon, I have a first very basic draft of what the box art will be. Let me see if I'm able to share.
Sure.
Yeah, screen. Here we go.
Are you hitting present?
Be advised, it's not the final art.
Okay.
But I don't know if I'm actually able to.
If you do
share.
present, yeah. If you do
present, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Share screen slides. Probably screen.
And Danny, you're not actually wrong there. Absolutely, for everybody.
Yeah.
The way to secure a game with us is really dead easy. You just send Fabrizio an email. As soon as you see it advertised anywhere, just put your name down for one, and you'll be on the mailing list, and you will get it as the first print, or the second, or the reprint, or whatever it's going. But as soon as you're on the mailing list, you're there.
And you pay only when the game is done. You don't pay in advance. So
this is a first draft for the new box art of Under an Iron Sky. I still have to, of course, to add a lot of things, including the 3 T-72 Soviet tanks advancing across the village and so on.
Anyway, what you should do is have, if you're going to have the tanks going down that little roadway or whatever, you should have like a burned out vehicle on the side. Yeah.
Sorry, what?
With the gun tube drooping.
Yeah.
needs
Now,
to be.
vehicle will be suggesting here, Mo?
Well, I don't know which vehicle. I mean, it could be any vehicle you choose. An M1, I mean, a Leopard, I mean, whichever one you want to use. I think it's good though, and that's one of the things I've always loved about this series are the covers are very stark,
Yeah.
and that's what it should be. It shouldn't be for something World War III at that level in the 80s between the Soviets and NATO would have been catastrophic. So I think showing that on the covers is really, really cool.
Yeah. I like bleak and dark and covers, and
Mhm.
exactly for the reasons that you just talked about. It's a catastrophic war. It could have been the apocalypse. So that's it.
Yeah, not only what it would have done to people, I mean, to men and material, but talking about the landscape, what it would have done to all the countries involved, it would have just turned Europe into a hellhole. And thankfully, we avoided that. We didn't need to do that again for a second time in the same century. So, or actually the third. So let's just be thankful we were able to avoid that.
Yep.
Absolutely.
So now go ahead and why don't we hit on this new game, In a Dark Wood, which is the next in the C3 series. And first off, we'll start off with an overview for those who are not already familiar with the C3 series is, which is this series is primarily geared about or concentrates more on command and control and the difficulties of command and control in theater. So, and I know you've got 5 games in the series planned, 4 out now. So let's go ahead and talk about In a Dark Wood.
Yep. The C3 series is focused primarily on the problems of command control and communication. So the basic idea is that, like in real warfare, nothing happens instantaneously. You cannot simply have a unit that is going to defend the city to the last man 1 hour and immediately counterattack at full strength the next hour. You need in a real warfare, you need time to organize these kind of changes. You need time to organize the logistic support. You need time to organize the fire support, to change the plans, to coordinate with the units on the flanks, and so on. There are really an awful lot of problems that must be coordinated, prepared, planned, and so on. So in the C3 series, it's very difficult and completely useless to do let's call it the classic panzer pusher. You just move your units and hope for the best and change your plan as it is needed as things goes by. You need a plan. You need and I mean a real plan, and you need time to develop your plan, to put it on the field. And you need, for example, real reserves to react to unexpected events, to contingencies, and so on. You cannot simply take a unit that has defended a sector of a front to the north until now, and move it to the south to bolster the defense of another sector of the front. Because the unit will be simply unable to move. And that's it. So you need real reserves. And another, I think, interesting element of the series is that most of things, when it comes to combat, most of things are not quantifiable. Quantifiable, is that correct? And I mean, you cannot simply add a couple of combat factors of artillery, and attack at 3-1 instead of 2-1. You actually have no precise idea of how the artillery will influence the combat. You have no idea of exactly how electronic warfare will affect the combat. There are also a lot of factors that could change the effectiveness of your units in combat, and they are quite difficult to take into account before the combat starts. So, like a real life commander, you could have an idea of how a single combat will develop, or how the different forces are one against the other, but you'll never have an exact combat ratio or combat difference. And you'll discover it once the combat is started. And of course, it will be too late, for example, for adding more artillery or more air support, or changing your plan or something like that. So this is the at broad lines, broad strokes, how the C3 series works. In a Dark Wood added several new things to the series. Mostly, one of the most interesting things was the real multinational problems, because there are at least a couple of units that are actually real multinational units. It's the West German 12th Panzer Division that is actually composed by 2 West German brigades and 1 American brigade. And this brings a lot of new problems that are specific and original on this particular sector of the front. And the second news about in the game are the French army. The French army has had in 1985 a table of organization and equipment quite peculiar, quite different from the rest of the NATO armies. And it also had a doctrine, a warfare doctrine, quite different from the other NATO armies. Basically, the French army was trained and organized mostly for quick counterattacks, and not for a sturdy defense on a line of a part of a sector. Another new element is the Czechoslovakian army. The Czechoslovakian army is probably one of the best in the Warsaw Pact, if you include the Romanian, Bulgarians, Hungarians, and so on. It's probably right behind the East German, the Soviet, of course, and the East German army. But he had in 1985 a lot of weak points, mostly outdated equipment, T4, T54 and T55 was practically the only mine battle tank used, and artillery. Most of artillery was still towed artillery, and so it was not spectacularly modern. But it had also had some locally produced equipment that was actually very good. And that's it for the news. I don't know if maybe Nicolas want to talk a little bit more about the French army, for example.
Well, you'll find a couple of very interesting units, notably the Rapid Action Force. So we've had a lot of discussions with that. There's one counter, the first infantry anti-tank regiment that I think by itself must have consumed at least 20 hours of design work. Because it was one of these, it's a very odd unit. It's basically a series of recon and anti-tank teams and engineers moved around by choppers. And so there are rules to make that happen. Just one word about French doctrine. As you've noticed, it is the exact opposite of we have our Bundeswehr expert, Pascal, who's just joined us.
Our man in Frankfurt.
Yeah. And
No, from Munich.
In Munich, yeah.
Just one word about French doctrine. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a French army colonel, and when he was younger, was an officer commanding a company of AMX-10 RCs. So I was asking him about, the fact that French armor at the time before the Leclerc had extremely thin armor. And his point was, armor that's here for shrapnel and stray shots. If the other guy gets the jump on you, you deserve to die. Okay. So I guess that's one way of looking at it. But the doctrine, it's the exact opposite of the 1940 French doctrine. Vianello and I were actually playtesting a game on that period this afternoon. The emphasis is on firepower and maneuver. And yeah, you'll get to see that because the way that the French were supposed to be used by NATO, given where they start and the time that some units would have needed to get to the front, is mostly as a counterattack force. So you'll get to see that in the game, and they're quite good, and the Czechs are, they're not bad, but they're definitely not at the level of first-line Soviets. So you'll get to see some interesting action there.
Yeah, there is a scenario that is specifically designed to show and use the French this way, and that is called Operation Marsh Harrier. And it's probably the only strategic counterattack that we figured out NATO could have actually tried on the field during a real war with against the Soviet. I know that Tony has probably something to say about this. And in an Operation Marsh Harrier scenario, we have a whole French second corps, and we have most of the rapid deployment force from France too, and several U.S. And the Canadian brigade counterattacking the Czechoslovakian First Army. That is, in that moment, it's the fourth or fifth days of war, and it's out of steam. And so it's exactly what the French doctrine was planning, and if well played by NATO, counterattack, as far as I've seen, it can be really devastating, really devastating. That's the goal for NATO for the scenario.
The only thing I would add is it isn't just this game. We have tried from Dogs of War onwards to impart not just a understanding of how the C3 cycle works, how the whole command and control problematic is, the fact that you can't do things instantaneously, as Fabrizio described, but also to indicate that NATO is not this homogeneous lump that it's quite often taken to be, particularly in the Anglo-Saxon world, in that, it's pretty much, we all work like the Americans, or we all work this, that, and the other. There are actually enormous great differences between the way the US work, the way the UK work, the way the Germans work, the way that, and we've shown that in the past 2 games, but actually, as Fabrizio indicated, it also really raises its head here in the case of 12th Panzer Division, having a US brigade under command. Actually, if you talk to the veteran guys of the time, and we did speak to 1 or 2 guys who worked in the G3 shops, who worked in the arty shops and all the rest of it, it was a nightmare to try and make work, because German tactical doctrine is entirely different from American tactical doctrine at that time. Actually, probably still today, but it certainly was at that time. And in this Operation Marsh Harrier counterattack, which Fabrizio and Nicola have just enthused about, and I enthuse about it as well, but it is not easy, because you are trying to play 4 different nations who've all got a slightly different way of operating, who all have slightly different rules in terms of the game as to how things have to be done and well. And you've really got to have played 1 or 2 games under your belt, I think, before you attempt to do Marsh Harrier. Marsh Harrier, if you get it right as NATO, you can get a great win. If you get it wrong as NATO, you just end up with this huge mess on your map of units that have got no support, nobody knows when they're coming to be with them, can't go there because they're out of command and control, or they can't go there because their logistic range for their individual nation doesn't reach that far. So all of those factors are taken in, but I would stress, without it having a stack of rules that high. We're talking about 1, 2 very cleverly constructed little paragraphs that just provide that difference and that flavor, the chrome, if you want to use that terminology, on top of the basic game. And that's pretty much up to do with Fabrizio writing it, and then getting hammered by people like me until he writes it properly, and then tested by Lionel until it works properly. And it does work properly. It works really well.
Tony is in particular referring to my first play test when the scenario for Operation Marsh Harrier was born, and I sent a couple of screenshots of my initial setup for NATO, and the initial setup was actually a mess, because I placed the French in the middle with some US on one side, with the Canadian on the other side, and that is true that actually the counterattack didn't develop too well, because there was too many traffic blocks, too many problems of logistical problems, too many problems of command and control. The units were too packed together. So you have to be careful with NATO, with your initial planning, because it could turn out in a big mess quite easily.
I mean, the reality was in 1985, when it's an interesting year for us to pick, because it's at about this time that General Otis in Centag, along with Sakur, was persuading the nations to be a bit more flexible, which is how you got this whole business with 1 infantry forward being placed under 12th Panzer then being left where it was in situ, i.e. where it was based, in and around Hammerburg and southwards within 7 Corps area, rather than going up towards Koblenz, which is the corps it was supposed to be in. But what was found after about a year or two's worth of actual testing on the ground, of field exercises, of training exercises, was that they ended up nominating people to work with the Germans. So the German doctrine of the time, there's no corps artillery in the German corps. If you look at the previous games that we've done, or any World War III game, the US is all about getting those corps field artillery brigades to support the point of main effort, to support the division, to get it going, to do something. 7 Corps got 2 brigades. Any other division in 7 Corps can use anybody from those brigades. The reality of life was that they just basically said 72 Field Artillery Brigade is going to support 12 Panzer, basta, because that way we can teach people to make their 2 differing arty doctrines sort of come together, that we can teach people, that we can create a platoon-size unit that is really a comms node that allows these people to talk to these people. Now, we don't do any of that on the board or in the game because it would make it too difficult, other than 1 or 2 clever little rules that you'll see if you get going. But there are real-life problems which we eventually wished to reflect in the game, and so to give you, as I always say, you get to make the big boy decisions that the commander has to make, and you're not trying to be 75, company commanders simultaneously and 15 battalion commanders simultaneously. Done. You're doing the big hand, small map stuff.
Yep, that's a very interesting aspect of the problem of the whole development of the C3 series, because if you go too much in detail, what you're risking is to produce not a war game about a 1985 conflict between NATO and Warsaw Pact, but an exercise simulation, a staff exercise simulation of the general defense plan of NATO in 1985. So you have to decide which elements of the constraints that NATO actually faced in 1985 you want to keep, and which constraints are actually too much and will transform the game not in a game but in a simulation, in a staff exercise of the general defense plan. And so, for example, one of the decisions was about the support that West German 12 Panzer could receive from U.S. artillery and so on.
What was the German doctrine when it came to artillery? You were explaining like what happened with the Americans with their artillery and loaning it and whatnot, but what was the Germans' idea behind their artillery? Why didn't they attach it to their battalion, their corps, or whatever?
That's exactly what they did. They took everything is doled out, given in command and given in support to an organization. What they're quite good at, actually what they were really good at, is then switching that during or between phases of operations. But that may then come with kind of constraints that are very difficult to represent in war games. So a very common German order will be, you can have this rocket battalion, MLRS equivalent, Lars they called it at the time, but you only get 3 rounds per launcher. Because the real drama with rocket artillery is ammunition, is how much ammunition you have, how can you move it around, and can you get it to the right place at the right time? And then some of the natures are short. So, everybody loved. You played games, I played games, computer games or other games. You get those rocket launchers dropping minefields everywhere. Ba-dum, 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 you know, blank off the whole board. And the reality of life is there ain't that many rockets with A2 mines in them, and they don't work that way. So you would get, for example, the Germans would turn around and say, you can have this battery of the divisional 2A brigade commander. They say you can have this battery of the divisional rocket launcher battalion for this operation, and you get 6 rounds of mines, 2 rounds of HE, or whatever it is, 1 round of smoke. That kind of thing. Now, we do not want to write rules so that you end up with having to write all this down, make that. So you just have to have something that influences the way it works, etc. In this particular case, that you can only call, therefore, on your own artillery. The other thing is, at that time, there are things called STANAGs, Standing NATO Agreements, that say you have to give orders in this format, or it's this 5-part, or we all turned and trained and turned to the American system of labeling the staff G1, G2, G3, 4, 5, 6, 7, etc. But you go much below that, then how you're actually using that is completely different. So for example, in 1985, the British and the US, others as well, were very much not mission command. It was very much directed command. So, if I'm turning around and saying, Nate, bang, you're commanding this, your mission is to take that and you're going to do it this way. And I'm going to give you that much support for this long at that time. And I want to see, these people right flanking, these people left flanking. Quite detailed, not just, thought through, discussed with you beforehand, but quite detailed in how you're going to maneuver, what you have to do. Germans reverse. Germans will turn around and say, actually, the corps commander wants to do this. And in that big scheme of things, the division's like...
The commander wants to do something that's going to
do that.
There we go.
Your bit is to do such and such. Here's some stuff. Off you go. But here's some stuff, off you go, means that you can't take that stuff off him. That stuff can't be used for somebody else whilst it's going on, etc., etc., etc. And it's up to you to then coordinate with the guys left and right of you. That's 2 diametrically opposite ways of working. In 1985, the Brits and the US were slowly moving from directed command to mission command, which you see it in some of the notes we put in the book. And Bagnall in the north, Otis in the south, both persuading Sakur that was the way forward, and also their own massive military establishments the way forward. And it's actually taking your own principles, but still then applying your own. And the last one, going back to guns again, you see in gunnery techniques, US has got huge amounts of firepower, massive, and uses it brilliantly. And US gunners not having a go at them, although they would have a go at every gunner, but that's by the by. But most fire missions have to be approved by the FDC. So you ask for fire, the FO or the FO says we want this much fire. The FDC says yes, 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 yes. It matches the algorithm. It's a bit like the Soviets in that respect. It's just faster than the Soviets ever did it. Ours, because we didn't have as many guns, was you allow the guy at the front, the little captain who sat in the foxhole, turns around and says, fire mission division, fire mission 3 batteries, 3 rounds, because it's only a recce patrol. Or he says, fuck me, this looks like the big one coming in, fire mission division, neutralize target on my order. And it's not confirmed by anybody that you trust the captain to make the call. But how do you reflect it in the game? At the level we're playing, very difficult. So you just say, you assume it works, but you also assume, therefore, and Fabrizio had a real problem with this, is that you can't just fire anybody's guns in support of anybody, because it didn't work that way. Never worked that way. until round about nowish, or 20 years ago.
I will tell you, it's a lot quicker now than that.
Yeah.
It's you should see the. Well, I mean, it's been shit a long time since I was in, but the stuff we even had then, you know, the Blue Force Tracker stuff. I could look on a computer, just poke a spot, it give me the grid coordinates down to 10 digits, exactly where I want it. Just say exactly where we want the munitions to fall. So much easier than 1985.
And in 1985,
you didn't have to read a map.
1985, it's still a guy with binos looking on a map and using a wax crayon.
Yep.
On a China, on a piece of plate, radioing it through, you know, on a VHF net. And yes, there are some computers in the FDCs which are calculating a bit of MET for him and a bit of this, that, and the other. But actually, in the end analysis, you rely on the guy at the front. And the one thing that nobody ever knew, which is why you rely on the guy at the front, is where all the other good guys are. And actually, the one thing that we never do in Wargame, and never will, I've tried for 50 years to write rules that make this work, and it doesn't work on a gaming table, either on a board game like we're talking about here, or even on a figures game, whatever. It's why boundaries were, people had a fetish about boundaries in 1985. And you see, Fabrizio's laughing again. We have had this.
No, I'm laughing because
I've ever met.
you are absolutely correct. You are absolutely correct.
But you know, boundaries are a fetish. Why are they a fetish? Because it tells you theoretically, at least, where the good guys are. You know, if you can't just fire across the boundary because you don't have Blue Force Tracker, or it's
no
or whatever we have in
exactly
2025
behind the boundary.
Yeah. You have whatever they reported that went up their chain, came down yours, you know, was spewed out at the other end, and it's probably, you know, if you're really lucky and you've got LOs across boundary LOs sat at contact points, it might only be 2 to 3 hours out of date. If you're really unlucky, it's 24 hours out of date.
You know, I was reading up on the rules. Now, I haven't played the C3 series, but I've read through the rules. And one of the things I like so much about it is that time factor, because that's something that I think so many games miss, is the fact that shit isn't instant. It takes time. All right. I was part of the chain of communication, so I understood it has to go up, has to come back down. You know, there's time delay in that. And there's some digital games, right? Warno, right? Third World War game. And in that game, you click your mouse and orders are instantly followed. But you've got the other game, Armor Brigade. They just released a second one not too long ago. And orders are not instantly followed in that game. There is a actual time delay. And you have to think ahead when you're issuing your orders. Your units are not going to instantly respond. And I've never seen a tabletop game accurately simulate that. And this is the first game I've actually heard that is tried to do that, to accurately simulate the fact that, yes, you're issuing orders, but the units are not going to immediately act upon those orders. It's going to take a little while. And then once they get the order, it's going to take them a little while to get moving, to deploy, to dig defense, you know, whatever the hell the order actually is. But it's not going to be instant.
Yeah, but the other thing too to remember, Nate, is that you also need to make sure that all your chains of command are in command, because if they're not, that adds even more delay to things, which is another layer of complexity in the planning process, which is really cool. And this is reflected real well in this game.
Well, that's exactly this thing that hooked me into the game, into the Third World War stuff, because I wasn't a Third World War gamer. I played Second War or Ancient War, and for the first time on my gaming table, playing the Dogs of War, I was seeing exactly this: order take times to be acted up on. That's it, and you cannot change your plan. If you change your plan in the middle of your defense, you're going to fail something. You have to have reserve. And even the reserve moving to the front takes times, and so on and so forth. And it was the great strength of the C3 series. Exactly this. for a game, a board game, not a computer game, but a board game, you see time moving very, very slowly when you have stuff to be done, and moving very fast when the guy on the other side of the hill begin to hit you.
Yep.
Something I'm
it.
curious about this game is, how did you guys determine the command radiuses? Because even back then, I mean, they had radios, and depending on the radio, it'll have different areas of communication. But even then, they had HF, which could reach around the world. So, I mean, how do you determine?
Well, it's also
X amount of hexes.
it's also terrain dependent too, and there's a lot of valleys
Well,
and things
you
like
cannot,
that.
of course, use. You cannot have an algorithm for a magic formula there. It's a combination of too many factors. The terrain. Are we using 2 quarters, front quarters, and a rear quarter that are alternating in moving, for example, 4 quarters? There are really a lot. How good is your radio network? Are you using wire communication to have you had the time to deploy wire communications or not? So you have to go on a more abstract view of a problem. And so the command range are realistic under some conditions, and probably not realistic under different conditions. There was no possibility, in my opinion, to have a number of rules simulating all the possible combination of every possible factor influencing the command range.
Like ASL, you mean?
If I just add one, when I was in 40 headquarters, my chief of staff, the CIO of the Signal Battalion turned around and said, "We need to practice, revisionary mode. What happens if we get jammed off? What happens if we get this strike? What happens if we do this, that, and the other?" And revisionary mode is hand speed Morse. It's fine. The signalers could do it. The signalers could talk to everybody with hand speed Morse. They could do it. But staff officers, so what I want to say to you, Nate, I now write down on a message pad. Tear the message pad off, I give it to a clerk. The little clerk runs to the Radio Shack. He gives it to the guy in the Radio Shack. He encodes it or not encodes it with offline coding, because he's going to send it by HF. So he's got his one-time pad out going, T is a Z, H is a, etc. By the time he's finished that, he's there giving it, etc., etc., etc. And the bloody message gets there, and then, of course, the reverse procedure happens. It's decoded, it's written down, it's handed to a clerk who runs and gives it to the officer, who says, no. And that it multiplies the time by forever. Where the only place I know where revisionary mode that I recall being used, and remember that's where I started in Scaly Backland, the absolute final Sakura nuclear release mechanism was by a US Signal Battalion who had basically 1 megawatt transmitters, with hand speed Morse. Now that will burn through everything. The only problem was the minute they switched them on is they knocked out the rest of the comms in any headquarters they were attached to. They were all told to move away rapidly to somewhere else and go and set up. But yeah, it's very, very difficult, which is why staff procedures become more important. And this was the real key why people went from mission command, because mission command, if you understand what your superior wants of the entire operation, and not necessarily just what your particular role is, if you understand the concept of the operation, then you can react when circumstances turn to be different than they are, or you're out of communications, or you're cut off. And this is what the Germans were exceptionally good at. And it is why, for example, at the beginning of World War II and all the rest of them, they run rings around people like the Soviets. It's not because they've got better kit, it's often worse. It's not even just because they've got radios, but they've got a chain of command that runs from the highest general to the lowest lance corporal, who is trained to think, what's the guy two up wanting out of me? Rather than what did he order me to do? And then you can work without comms.
This is an interesting question about what is taken into account in the order delay times.
Yeah, was fog of war taken into account in the order delay times, or is it just that you knew how long it took?
It's not fog of war in itself, but it's more the chaos of war. Because you, as Tony explained, and as Jimpy explained too, there are a lot of things that you only have a very confused idea about during a real war.
More friction than fog. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the basic time were taken from some U.S. military stuff that was a simulation that was considering the actual minutes the necessary for preparing, giving, transmitting, receiving, interpreting, and put into practice orders for different units of different size. And there is also a null formula that was used by the US Army. That is, if I remember correctly, is the 2/3, 1/3 formula. That is something like if your division headquarters must send an order to the division, 2/3 of the available time will be taken by the division headquarters to prepare, write down, and send out the orders. The remaining 1/3 will be taken by the brigade headquarters. And of this 1/3, the brigade headquarters will take 2/3 of this 1/3 to prepare, interpret, and send out the order, and so on, until the last unit, until the platoon or something like that. This is an interesting formula that gives how the time is split between the different levels. But it doesn't give you how many times is actually needed for preparing an order.
Well, you can't always decide that. And actually, it's interesting. What you've described is probably real practice. The actual rule is the other way round. So if I've got 8 hours before a mission starts and I'm at the division level, I get 1/3 of that time. So 2.5 hours later, I should be issuing an order. Of the remaining 6, the brigade gets 1/3 to do it. The reality is what you described. Right. It goes the other way around. It becomes 2/3, 1/3. And it generally means, and Gimpy will know this, is that by the time it gets all the way to the bottom, some bloody corporal or sergeant section commander is going, right, fuck it, lads, no time for orders, follow me, here we go. Because that's it.
Because you have 1/3 of 1/3 of 1/3 of 1/3 of 1/3 of 1/3.
Once we were out in the field, what Harrier said was bunk. I mean, we did what we did. Right, we weren't worried about them back at base because they're back at base. We dealt with the situation, individual unit leadership. So our sergeant, our staff sergeant, whoever was leading our squad or platoon while we were out, I mean, he made all the calls. He, like you said, he knew the general premise of why we were out, whether we were looking for bombs, looking for the insurgents, whatever we were doing. But we really didn't care what the captain back at the COC was saying. Like, his opinion was bunk at that point.
Well,
We'll
you know,
talk to you when we get back.
The thing is, you have these old Napoleonic games or Civil War games where there's a delay in writing the message and then getting the guy on horseback or the runner getting out to the wing and passing that on to the formation. At that point, there's that delay. It's just a couple levels. It's literally just from the commander here to the commander there, written and carried on horseback over there. So whatever amount of time it takes to do that, and then disseminate that out to the regiment, to the brigade, or whatever. Here now in modern times, it's the same thing, and it's made just as long, if not longer, sometimes shorter, because there's more layers than there were back then. You have faster technology, but you have more layers, which delays things. And it's always the human element that delays things, being that you have to go down through so many levels. But that's also what the interesting thing is. And seeing it reflected in a war game is really cool, because we're so used to God mode and instantaneous committing to whatever decision you make at that time. Whereas when you're sending an order here, you're trying to send an order that's going to have an effect hours out, not instantaneous. So you have to try to think of that way. And that's why you were saying earlier, it's so important to have a plan and to understand the forces under your command. And I know Nicholas wants to talk some about the French. So let's hit on the French, because they were more on the counterattack than they weren't the big, bad, blunt hammer. They were more the finesse and agility, as well as having a good punch. But there was a lot, like I said, a lot more about the agility with them with counterattacking.
No, I was actually going to go back a little bit more about the command system, because we were talking about the setting up comms. One of the things I love about the system is that one of your resources, your command points, they're actually your staff guys. So you lose them when they're preparing an order. So I have this vision of the little command points, the little guys, scratching away and writing messages and doing whatever they need. And one of the things that you need to plan, and it's really obvious the first time you play, it's not obvious when you just read the rules, is that to get your HQ has two modes. They have a road mode where they're very vulnerable and their command radius is half of what it is normally, so it's really short. And if you're a unit out of command, you get massive penalties in combat. But flipping it one way or the other takes a command point, because some of the command staff need to pick a spot, set up comms, whatever it is that they need to do. So that's another thing that you need to plan for. And it's usually one of the very first things that hits you, especially when you're the pact, because you're the one attacking, and you're the one attacking with an even more rigid command structure, which means that everything we've discussed, that applies double for the pact. In terms of the French, we didn't. They're treated largely like NATO. There was only a little nuance in that we had divisions that were either 1/3 or 2/3 of NATO divisions. So the French can actually use a lower level of order because they have fewer guys to order around. But I think you'll find that in that respect, they work much like NATO. The one thing is that, of course, we've had all kinds of rules to make sure that the French need to have their own area of responsibility. They were outside of the integrated command, so you have extra restrictions with the French. For instance, their close air support, they have their own close air support area. And they need to, if you want to use French air points, you need to be in you need to have a French unit involved, stuff like that. Again, it's not terribly complicated, but it really means that you need to give the French their sector and to have them manage that independently, which is most likely what would have happened.
There is an interesting question that I've seen if we have considered a variable delay time for reorders instead of a fixed one. Actually, the delay time that is the delay time presented in the tables and used is a best case delay time. I mean, the situation on the field can actually increase this delay time by a huge amount. For example, one of the quarters that is involved in the order has been bombarded by the enemy, or is engaged, or is completely destroyed. So your delay time is going to increase. Do you have your units are engaged by the enemy? Your delay time will further increase, and so on. There are several factors that can increase your delay time by a lot. And so, yes, actually, the delay time used by the C3 system is not fixed. It depends by your tactical situation and by your communication and by the status of your communication and command structure. If you are using, for example, at the extreme, if nuclear or chemical weapons are being used on the battlefield, the delay time for every order for both sides will double. And this, in practical terms, means that you will not ever be able to give orders that have any sense on the battlefield compared to the real situation of the battlefield. Everything will take probably days. And that's it.
Okay, I just wanted to see if there was any other questions in here that I needed to catch up on from everybody aside from the usual. Hey, when's the reprints coming? Like we saw from Vincenzo.
Okay, so I hope to have, as I said at the beginning, I hope to have a reprint, a fourth echelon for 1985 Under an Iron Sky quite quickly in Thin Red Line Games terms. It means in any case at least
in 2025.
Yeah, exactly. It means 2-3 months at least before being ready.
Well, I will bring that up, something that I've mentioned to you offline, and then we kind of talked about it briefly online. It's like, have you seriously taken into consideration going the route of crowdfunding and to do more reprints and things like that?
Frankly, no. No. I don't like the basic idea of asking money before I have a product ready to sell. And I want to be sure that in the moment that you're paying for something, I have a product that is ready to be shipped, and there will be no problems at all.
That's fair. But what about this? What about this? What about you when you have like Under an Iron Sky, fourth echelon, once you have that ready to go, or the next C3 game ready to go, it's literally ready to go.
Yeah.
Then you start a crowdfunding campaign for 30 days, have people give you money, and then when it's all done, you hit the send button to the printer, and boom, you have everybody else pay for it.
When I have already printed everything, not before that. I have to. Everything must be already printed and ready to ship. Not before. I'm not asking money before that.
It's just what bothers me, and this isn't on you, is that I see some of the resellers out there, and they're really just gouging the prices on some of these. I mean, you see
demand.
Yeah, well, I mean, they hold their value, but there's a difference between holding your value and selling it for $1,000, which I've seen like multiple.
I know.
ones up there, and that's so unfair to the gamers who want to be able to play the
Well,
game.
I'm also thinking that he
The
can.
obvious solution is reserve a copy, and you're safe. We have normally we have months of development, printing, and so on. During all these months, you can reserve a copy simply by sending an email. And no money, no credit cards, nothing at all. You send an
It's
email,
a
hey man, I want a copy, and that's it.
it's the fairest crowdfunding ever. You don't
Yep,
send any money. You just
yep.
send an email to Fabrizio. He reserve a copy for you. When the game is ready to go, is ready to ship, you pay. You put it in the box.
Yeah, and you have
It
your
goes to
copy
you.
for the standard price.
Yeah.
Yep, that's it.
Yeah.
So under an iron sky, you're going to go for the fourth echelon.
Yeah.
You're looking at
After that, we'll have the new volume for the new series Strategicon, it's covering the ancient warfare. I cannot go more in detail than that right now. And after the second volume of Strategicon, we'll have a second echelon for the Dogs of War. And after that, we'll see. Normally, I try to reprint at least one game a year. And normally, I'm not able to reprint more than one. So it will be probably Under an Iron Sky for 2025 and the Dogs of War for 2026. Sorry, guys. Can do better than this. That's it.
Well, the other thing I've been saying is you really just one of the things I really love is the compelling covers that you have. And I keep busting your chops about, hey, we need to get art prints of these pictures of these
Yeah,
covers.
I'm thinking about it because
Yeah.
me too. I would really like to have them printed in big format here in my studio. And so I'm really thinking about it. Yeah.
I want a copy too. My wife, maybe she wasn't.
Too dark for the bedroom, maybe
for,
or
for the
not.
bedroom, no, but even for no, for the living
No,
room.
anyway,
No.
I would
For the
really like.
gaming room, it's okay. For the gaming room, it's great.
I would really like to give it a try and see what happens. Maybe with one of the best, I don't know, in a dark wood. I like the box art very much. Sacred Oil too was a very good box art, I think, and Die Fest on Gamburg is probably my favorite. It's it's perfectly dark.
It is, and that's again, that's what's so compelling is it gives that stark reality, that harsh grittiness. This is what it would be. It wouldn't be this bright, cheery. Well, I mean, war should never have bright, cheery covers, but it really does get the point across that if there was this conflict between NATO and Warsaw Pact, there would have been potential for introduction of nuclear weapons, obviously, and chemical weapons more than almost definitely would have happened. And what that would have done to the people, the environment, everything, it would have just, like I said, it would have been catastrophic. And that's what's so compelling about those covers. It gets that point across that the conflict would have been so catastrophic. And I think
speaking of which,
great.
Reading the rules, I can't remember. When it comes to the nuclear, chemical, biological weapons in the game, is there a prerequisite before they can be deployed, or can you start like bombing turn one?
There are optional rules that are limiting the use for NATO, but basically you can use them at any time in the C3 series. There is an option, I can't remember if it's optional or actually standard rule. If you start using weapons of mass destruction, there is always a risk that everything will go south very quickly.
Yeah.
And at that point, the first side that started using weapons of mass destruction lose the game. The other side doesn't win, of course, because you can only imagine the mess. Yeah, but anyway, it's something that I think it's needed to stop players to use nuclear or chemical weapons too lightly. I'm not a big fan of the theory that nuclear or chemical weapons would have been used immediately or at all during a conflict, NATO Warsaw Pact conflict. I'm a big fan of what John Hackett described in his Third World War book. I mean, at a certain time, it's possible that the Soviet would have launched a nuclear strike of some kind and of several possible magnitudes against a NATO objective, just to show how determined they were into obtaining victory. But after that, I think that things that probably would have stopped if bad luck was not striking down right in that moment. Who knows?
Well, I mean, there were the Soviets had thought of they had trained for and thought of using non-persistent chemical agents for certain areas, and then just to minimize the capability of the NATO troops, and then push through. And then by the time they push through, that stuff would have wore off at that point. But and there is definitely a tactical use for that. But when you get to nuclear weapons, that's where things do change considerably. Chemical weapons are terrible, don't get me wrong, but once you start using something like a tactical nuclear weapon, that's when things do change considerably.
Yeah, but the problem in that is that the official answer and doctrine of NATO should Warsaw Pact started using chemical weapons was as there was practically no chemical weapons in the NATO arsenal in Europe, was to immediately escalate to nuclear weapons. And this is, of course, a doctrine that had as a main goal to block any idea on the Warsaw Pact to start a war by using immediately chemical weapons. So you're using chemical weapons, I'm going to use nuclear weapons immediately, and that's it. So we are back at point zero, and with a possible nuclear holocaust going immediately.
No, that's why they said World War IV would be fought by with sticks and stones, because if it did escalate, it would have been just
if you are lucky, stick and stones. In the worst case, no more wars.
But the good thing is allowing that in the game is good, because there's always the curiosity. Everybody has the morbid curiosity. What happens if I nuke this and nuke that? It's like, well, now you can play it in a model scenario or campaign or whatever, and see what the repercussions would have been. Is it worth using a nuclear weapon or nuclear weapons in order to try to win? And in the end, you really lose. You're not going to know until you play it out. And I think it's great that we can play it out in a game and do a reset and no one's hurt.
It's a curiosity that I have to, but I've tried nuclear weapons several times, and I must say that the final result for me is something that is not even remotely similar to warfare as we think and conceive about it. And there is no more possible tactics. I mean, I have a very solid front line now, and 30 seconds later, I just have a hole
Yeah.
on the map. And so what I'm going to do, I'm
Well,
going to
this is
produce more holes on your line too, and
well, this is
that's
a
it.
good point here that Achilles makes. He's saying it would have been used as deep strike weapons, like they would have, Soviets could have used it to hit the Pomka sites, things like that, to try to further delay the NATO response, which is part of their doctrine too. They would have, as far as utilizing them for passage through areas, also for the deep strikes, like I was saying, the Pomkas and things.
But you hit immediately back onto the fact that the NATO reply is nuclear because there is no chemical.
Yes.
You start using it as deep strike to take out an airfield. You're not using non-persistent. You have to start using persistent if you really want to take out an airfield and stop it being usable. You immediately then, if you look where the airfields are, they're all, okay, they're not right in the centers of city, mostly. But there's enough civilian population around that all of a sudden, you've got the West German government saying, we've just had 250,000 civilian casualties yesterday. What are you doing about it?
Yeah, then it does.
They're either giving up, which was one option in one book, novels of the time, without giving away the titles, but, or we're going nuclear because it's the only option there is. Reply. Because the other way of taking out an airfield is just to obliterate it.
Yeah.
Boom. And as you pointed out, that the chemical could be an interesting tactical weapon from the Soviet, from the Warsaw Pact, if used correctly. But it has to stay tactical. If it goes up to, for example, up to an airfield near a city, it's going to be dismissed. But if it stays tactical and you use it wisely, it could be an interesting weapon for the Warsaw Pact, even from the start. And the game, you can play this and see how it goes.
It's interesting on the training that we had is the reality of was the belief that chemical. It's World War I shows it. First use, it works. Thereafter, once people are acclimatized and used to taking the countermeasures, in which it for 99% of the things is just the respirator, the suit is only for contact nerve agents. That's it. Yeah, it's it.
But you are also degrading.
You're better off firing those rockets with HE warheads on the end of it because the damage then does actual real damage and stays.
Yeah, but the other aspect of it,
is the huge mental aspect to it. Yeah. It is extremely terrifying to think that you might be hit with mustard gas or some other stuff. I mean, to think you have to wear that gas mask,
and you're also slowing troops down because they're in MOP 4.
You are seriously combat ineffective. I mean, I've worn MOP 4 for months, and it is ungodly uncomfortable, especially.
And that's what we used to train in it all the time. We wore it from the moment we got into barracks at the start of an exercise, came back, whatever it was, weeks later, and took it off. And that's it. You wear it all the time because it's the only way. You just get used to the bloody stuff. And it's just horrible. You're right. It's horrible. And it also used to scare the shit out of me. It was the one thing that really did used to wind me up.
Can you imagine?
I mean, if it went nuclear, I was just gone. Goodbye. It was the end of the world stuff.
Yeah. You just evaporate.
The French had a quite different nuclear doctrine. Nicolas.
We still do. The French use nukes as a warning. So you get too close, you eat a Pluton tactical nuke. And the Germans weren't fond of that because if you look at the counters, you'll see that the range means that, well, basically the nuke is going to land in Western Germany. So, that's and I have to say that the other Frenchman, Mr. Martinez, here, when we were playing Queen's Gambit, the thing he did by turn 2 was to just shower the Brits with nukes. One thing that Fabrizio may not remember is that we have you either have the no holds barred victory conditions, which is where you have the escalation rules that can, result in the planet dying, basically. Otherwise, normally the first one who uses nukes or chems, and I think NATO's cannot use nukes until the other guy has
it's an
used
optional
chems,
rule.
loses one victory level. So there's a cost to doing it. So if you need to weigh that before you use them, but no, we actually had fun. Lionel and I had fun nuking one another, but indeed, at the end of it, I think we had taken 40% casualties from nukes.
There was nobody on the front line of us.
But there is
The ones that were still there were sort of glowing faintly.
Come near me and I drop a small sun on you. Let's see how that works.
There is this quite interesting French doctrine that actually considered tactical nuclear missiles perfectly usable in the case of the conflict against the Warsaw Pact. Until at the condition that the strategic nuclear force, the French strategic nuclear force, was intact. So they differentiate between a tactical use of nuclear weapons and a strategic use of nuclear weapons. That is, of course, they were not the only ones making this difference, but I've always thought that is quite a dangerous way to see the problem. I don't know.
I mean, but that was straight NATO policy. It's always about controlled escalation, in theory. That's it. The days of First Reich and MAD died in the mid-60s as soon as that. But we were still carrying, I think it's pretty much known that 8-inch nuclear shells went to the Gulf in 1990. Lance rockets went to the Gulf. I mean, most people's Lance only has nuclear warheads. So, there's no HE war. I mean, the Yak had HE warheads, but nobody else can either afford or wants to buy that number of rockets, particularly as they were so bloody inaccurate anyway. You need to put a nuclear warhead on to ensure that you hit what you're actually aiming at. So I think it's there. It's to be used. I think we all hoped it would never be used, but I think we believed that gas from their side was likely, very likely, and that wasn't a pleasant thought.
Which is why I think that having it in games is good and important, especially for modeling World War III. But
there should be a penalty.
Yeah, there has to be a penalty of some sort to it. But at the same time, when you look at it in the real world, do you think the Warsaw Pact is going to care about what the rest of the world thinks at that time? Because they're just going to be thinking, we're going to use this to punch through and open that hole and get to the Rhine or whatever.
No, they're not. Which is why the reply is you dump that and you get a big bucket of sunshine.
Yeah,
That's as simple as that. If you want to risk that, then that's it. I mean, they did not believe in this theory of escalation at all, but we did, and it was taken as part of deterrence. There you go.
Well, Pascal's back. I know that he was connected before and then he got disconnected. I don't know if he lost his internet connection or not, but I hope he still has his connection there.
Some problem, yeah.
Are you there, Pascal? Oh, I think he might have froze again and not realized it as he connected. But
there was a message came up from him that said that he's got connectivity problems.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
somewhere or other.
Yes.
Well, there was a very minute message on my screen, but
yeah, I see it there. Yeah. He's got severe network issues, unfortunately. So we will hope that he can join us at some point. Maybe he can get through it. Now, he might not get this message here for another couple minutes. when it comes through. But let's see, we've got a question from Hex to Hex. I don't own any TRL games, and I'm curious. We prepared for massive surge of Warsaw Pact armor in our GDP area. Is this simulated in TRL games?
I don't know what's your GDP area. I imagine it's Central Europe, generally speaking. Anyway,
Jeff, expand on that, Jeff.
Anyway, yeah. Both the 1985 and the C3 series are Fulda. Okay, yeah. there is of course a big surge of big Warsaw Pact offensive in the Fulda sector. In our strategic Warsaw Pact plan, the Fulda sector is not actually the main offensive or the main thrust. The main thrust is more in the British Army of the Rhine and North German Plains sector. But in the Fulda sector, we have at least a couple of Warsaw Pact and East German armies attacking just to block US 5th Corps and to engage most of the US reinforcement that are coming through Reforger and so on. So yes.
Just want to put up there this last call for questions. So if anybody has any further questions from the audience, go ahead and post them up there now. And Frank says Fabrizio managed to capture our basic GDP plan.
Thank you. This is
I am
most merit of our military consultant too for that, because most of his GDP was actually very difficult to retrieve and also to interpret in some cases. So it's most of the merit goes to them.
Hey,
has I think we asked you this last time, but I can't remember. Has any of the current conflict in Ukraine changed any of your opinions on the Soviet force, the menace? Maybe it's not as hyped up as it was. Maybe it's not as good. And
totally different eras.
I understand totally different eras, but they're still using a lot of the same equipment, same tactics, same BS they would have been using in the 80s. And not to mention, I mean, they operated as the Soviets. A lot of their military lied to the leadership to make themselves look better. They might have had broken equipment and they lied about it, and, so on and so forth. I wonder if any of that was taken into account.
A future game on the Ukraine conflict, you mean?
No, he's asking if seeing what's going on in Ukraine today has affected any of your design decisions for games set in the 80s.
I think. Do you want to go first, or should I?
Okay, maybe Tony's going to answer.
I think our view, Nate, overall is, it's easy to say different times, different eras, different this, that, and the other. But let's put some reasoning behind why we think that we do think there's different times, different eras. I think what we would consider as what has happened to the Soviet army between 1990 and now. And it was always corrupt, but it was never as corrupt as it is now. And if you look at them falling out of the end of World War II, it's pretty basic at the lowest tactical level, and they don't have an NCO corps like we have, like you have, like anybody in the West has, and therefore their skills and drills are nowhere near as good as ours, and therefore on a man-to-man, a tank-to-tank basis, we're going to win. But the point is, it was never on a one-to-one basis anyway. I mean, there is really the kind of massive imbalance in force structures that were potential at the beginning is one thing. But I also think if you look at the Soviet or the Red Army as it comes out of World War II, it's bloody good at operations. at the operational level of war. I mean, and actually started pretty good at strategy, but it's really good at the operational level of war. And we were pretty much hidebound at the operational level. I mean, the political demands upon the NATO defense plan, if you look at the original NATO defense plan from 1950, before the Bundeswehr is formed, we're defending the Rhine. The West Germany is just some kind of, it's a defense zone. You go back to the Rhine, and then by the time you get to the mid-50s, it becomes a trigger for their massive nuclear release. It's only by the time we get to the late 70s and the early 80s that we're actually really seriously talking about fighting a conventional war there. And it's about that time that you see first the changes to try and get parallel with the operational art, which Otis, which various Brits did up in the north, but also we then started to win the technological war, and then we really dipped out in the 70s. But by the early 80s, that's it going. By 85, you can really argue you're on a tipping point, both politically and in straight military terms. They'd missed the boat. But there was certainly a boat up until the 1970s. Would they have lost more than us? Almost certainly. Would it have been, pretty? Would they have, got the tick box out of the NTC or this? No. But, I remember an East German general talking to me in 1991 who's saying, okay, we have an attack front of 5 kilometers. You've probably got 2 troops of tanks there. And then all my German friends, all my German colleagues say, yeah, we got 2 troops, 8 Leopard 2, and we can fire this rate and this, that, and the other. He said, yeah, but we're only starting 2 Ks apart. And in the end, if only 20 of my T-55s make the sides, we'll shoot you dead. Yeah, or you have to go, and we've got the ground anyway. Now, you can argue how many sets of battalions of T-55s can you waste in order to do it? But they got more to waste than we did. So I don't think there's a great change in the view of how they would work operationally. I don't think we ever thought they were particularly better soldiers. What I think we thought was that they were still, because of the nature of their society, they were probably quite hard physically and used to discomfort much more than perhaps we were. But the rest, no. I think we haven't changed in opinion, and not enough to make a change to a 1985 based game anyway. That's very long answer. Sorry.
There was a German general that said something like regarding World War II, the Russian had a lot of units and troops that for our standard they had neither the equipment nor the training to be compared to what we would consider normally a functional combat unit. But despite that, they were there. And that, I think it's more or less a good consideration. The Soviet army, as Tony said, was very good at something. It always had some endemic problems like corruption, like equipment not well maintained, and more and more problems, a lot of stuff. But nonetheless, it was the Soviet army. I mean, they had a quantity of equipment and a defense budget that was so huge to probably overcome some of these problems and to represent a real threat to the West up to the latest years. Not probably as it was depicted at the level that it was depicted in the West and presented in the West by some reports from CIA or RAND or something like that. But anyway, they were a force you cannot joke with. Russia
Well,
today is probably just a shadow of
yeah.
of what the Soviet Union army was. That's it.
Plus, you still had a lot of the
Better so.
holdovers. You still had a lot of survivors that were still in leadership positions back then.
Yep.
From, as they called it, the Great Patriotic War from World War II. So you still had that mindset there, and these guys were warriors. They knew how things worked in a war. So compared to today, where you've got guys that are mostly peacetime. Now they have been in wars. Don't get me wrong, Afghanistan, Syria, things like that, but not like the World War II.
A lot of more of experience in massive mechanized warfare. Yep.
Exactly.
1985. Yep.
Yeah.
No,
so go ahead, Nicholas.
Yeah. If people are interested in some good data of how the Soviet army worked from the inside at that time, the absolute best book I found is The Bear Went Over the Mountain, which is a set of tactical vignettes in Afghanistan with what happened, the comments from the Frunze Military Academy, and then the comments from an American with some context. For instance, the fact that more than half of the casualties of the Soviet army back then were due to avoidable medical problems, for instance, lack of hygiene. Like dysentery. I mean, you'd think, and even their special forces were known to litter all over so that the Afghans could track them down. And it's really interesting because you see a lot of the problems that currently plague the Russian army already existed. Officers settling their differences over a woman with hand grenades in the HQ, stuff like that. And it's interesting.
That's one way of
doing
it.
They could do well, and some of the tactical rigidity as well. But I do think that it's very hard to draw conclusions because one of the major differences also is just the volume. The Soviets back in '85 had the entire Warsaw Pact. They had the Poles, they had these Germans, they had the Czechs. And as Joseph used to say, quantity has a quality of its own. And they had a shit ton of quantity.
And they were good at the operational level. They were very, as Tony pointed out, they were good at the operational level.
Yep.
Nowadays, not so much.
They're not even good at the company level right now, let alone operations. I mean,
well, the face of war has changed, though. I mean, the era of the main battle tank is over.
Yes.
No,
right?
It's not.
Yeah.
No, it pretty much is. You have man-portable objects, weapons that are able to take out main battle tanks. The face of war just is not the same that it was in the 80s.
Yeah. It just adapts and changes. That doesn't mean that the era of the main battle tank is over. Just
they still have their uses,
yeah,
but they aren't as useful as they used to be 30, 40 years ago.
Well, it's different type of warfare now, yeah. So, I mean, it has evolved just like anything else. Everything evolves. You're not going to have big mechanized war in today's lower, density conflicts than you are back then, than we would back then. So things have changed, and everybody's talking about man-portable. There were man-portable anti-tank weapons in World War II, just like there were in the World War III era. And now everybody's gotten all hot and
you
bothered
see
over
the ebb and flow. Armor will increase, a new weapon will come along, and then you give up armor and go for speed again to avoid that.
That's what I'm saying. You can go to medium tanks, you can go to remotely piloted tanks, things like that. But armor is always going to be needed, just like infantry is always going to be needed, because you still need to take ground to have a resolution to the conflict.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure about the VMBT being finished as the main weapon. I've been hearing that since the 70s, and it's still there.
Well, think about it. I mean, it costs many multi-millions to make a main battle tank, but you can have a few $1,000 weapon carried by one person, fired from a building or from cover, from wherever, and you take out not only the crew but the tank itself for just a fraction of the cost.
But when you take out the one tank, that
unsustainable.
other tank's going to take, other tanks in that unit are going to take out that infantry unit.
For
So
what the loss of one man, for the loss
who's
of
the one guy
others.
who's going to want to be suicidal enough to go out there and take him out?
Well, I mean, you think if you're invading my country and I can take out 10 of you and something important to you, and I give up me, that's all I'll take.
But again, if you employ air-land battle properly, that one infantry guy should be taken out by infantry that's out on your wings anyway. So you shouldn't have to worry about if your screening should take care of that. But
they weren't doing that.
Well, yeah, that's incompetence in their, their entire chain of command. And also there's, other things that a lot of people were saying that there was supposed to be payoffs made ahead of time that weren't made. And that's why they just walked in and left themselves wide open. Because, I mean, you see that whole road filled of tanks. It's like, that's an A-10 driver's dream. It's like, oh, really?
Yeah.
There's no air cover. There's no nothing.
You've always got to trust the troops that are on the ground because they're the ones that really have to deal with it. Like with us, we put sandbags on the bottoms of all of our vehicles because we were facing explosions from the bottom. And now you see things like Soviet tanks that have these bars and plate steel welded upon them, making these big boxy structures. And it's all to prevent drones from being able to fly and detonate the drone before it actually reaches the tank. That's something that they need to pay attention to. It's the troops that really understand this stuff.
That's the thing is everyone's all hot and bothered over drone warfare now. It's like, yeah, everybody's hot and bothered over drone warfare till there's anti-drone defenses out there where you press a button and all the drones get ineffective in the area. And then now you've leveled that playing field. So it's like everything else. It's always going to be developing.
Drone warfare is a game changer. That's there's no doubt on that. Yeah, but I think that the main battle tank will still be there in 20 years or 30 years. Probably.
Oh yeah.
It's not going to vanish.
Just my 2 cents.
Yeah, there's too many of them still around. We're still going to have them. They're just not as effective right now as they used to be.
Yeah, could be. Yeah.
So, okay, I guess that's it. We don't have any other. Danny Sakari, last question. When are you going to reprint? You already answered.
Soon. I'm going to
rewind.
No,
that will happen. Under an Iron Sky will happen sometime this year.
We'll have Under an Iron Sky 4th echelon this year, and a 2nd echelon of the Dogs of War in 2026.
Which, if you were paying attention, Danny, you would have heard earlier.
Boy Scout 4.
Hey guys, don't limit yourself. The Fate of All is quite good too. Try the old stuff.
Yes. Yeah. So there we go. Soon.
Fate of All is good. Like Fate of All.
So with that, I'm going to say this is the end of the show today, and want to thank everybody for joining us, the audience for joining us, as well as all of our guests today, Fabrizio, Tony, Lionel, and Nicholas, and my esteemed co-host, Nate Rogers, for joining us today, and appreciate all you guys being here. We will catch you on the next stream. Take care, everybody. Have a great